Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much. It's like 10 o'clock there, isn't it?
9:15 on the East Coast.
Well,
I'm not on the East Coast. I'm on Eastern Time. Which, by the way, I have, I get a lot of folks that come in for one-on-ones here, and I'm in Chattanooga, so I'm in East Tennessee. I get folks in from Nashville, the greater Nashville area, Franklin. I also get folks in from Alabama sometimes and Georgia, and almost all of them are Central Time. Because if you go, I don't know where the changeover happens, but if you go just west, just a little bit from here, it goes to Central Time, and so it fucks me up every time. I'll just be sitting around twiddling my thumbs, be like, "Is this guy going to show up?" So, yeah, just another reason why time zones are bullshit.
I agree. So
today, we've got a new thing happening. I am drinking whiskey on this podcast.
As am I.
It's not new for you. It's new for me. I am drinking. I just bought this. It's Evan Williams Bottled in Bond.
Look at you.
It's a. I guess I feel like I needed an everyday drinker because I drink so much. No, it's pretty good. 100 proof, hot, but with a little bit of water and a little time out in the air. It tastes pretty good. It's kind of nutty.
I am drinking Kirkland's 19-year single malt, which is basically Alexander Murray 19, except, if you get the Costco Kirkland's brand, I paid $68 plus tax. I think the Murray is in the hundreds, mid-hundreds somewhere.
Wow, I didn't even know Kirkland made whiskey.
Oh,
wow.
Dude, you don't get booze at Costco?
I didn't know. I don't go to Costco, so there's my problem there.
Yeah, the Kirkland's brand stuff's good. The tequila's good. The whiskey's good.
So is this like the same juice? Is it one of those situations?
Yeah,
just
pretty much.
Just a relabel?
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Same juice, just a relabel, because it says distilled at Alexander Murray.
All right. Hey, not bad. Not bad. Well, my thing about bourbon in particular is I've gotten spoiled, you see, hanging out with all these strength coaches that are into bourbon. I don't drink very often, so whenever I do pull out the whiskey, I usually want something really nice because, if I buy a $60, $70 bottle of whiskey, it's going to last. Mm-hmm. And I'm used to drinking like Blanton's Willet.
Right.
I have some Willet rye that's fantastic. I almost pulled that out, but I gotta keep that for special occasions because I can never find it.
That's pretty good stuff, man.
That's the best stuff in my opinion. I'm a rye fan. But yeah, Weller 12, all that stuff. Well, Antique 107. But yeah, I was like, I need a whiskey that I can pull out if there's a group of guys come over to the house. Like, I'm not going to pull out my Willet rye for everybody.
Right.
So I need kind of like a good value whiskey that I can pull out. And then I don't mind drinking on a Tuesday evening. And this fits the bill. Not bad.
I hear you, man.
So anyway, that's the reason why we're talking about this right now is not just because it's good. We're also talking about it because today we want to talk about alcohol and training and alcohol and diet and body fat. Because I think they're all wrapped up in there. And we need to talk about it some more because there's some things to say. I had a client who should go nameless. I was just talking to yesterday. He had COVID a week and a half ago. So he took off last week because he's feeling pretty wrecked.
Okay.
So I was checking in with him. I was like, how you doing, man? And he's like, hungover. I'm like, oh, okay. So he went out on kind of like a weekend trip with his wife and I guess got hammered over the weekend. I was like, oh, I thought you had COVID.
Well, good for him.
So good for him. But anyway, that's to say that okay, so now that I'm programming for this guy, I'm going to have to make some considerations about what, the loads he can tolerate and the volume that he can tolerate. Not just because he was sick, but also because I know, okay, the guy's coming off a weekend of partying. I'm going to have to adjust some things in his program. Anyway, so that's a good starting point for us.
Yeah. So alcohol's fun. We're both drinking it right now. I just had to point that out. I think it's in my ebook somewhere, my little mini ebook that I need to put on the website already and, sell.
I didn't know you had an ebook. Tell me about this.
Yeah, no, I have a little short manual that I wrote a while back. I've edited it over the years. I just need to put it on the website. But what was I going to say? Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to drink. That's why we like to do it. It tastes good. Although, some people argue, it's not about the taste, but it is what it is. So alcohol, from a nutrition standpoint, we kind of treat it as a macronutrient, even though it's technically not, but it contains 7 calories per gram or milliliter. 1 gram equals 1 milliliter, just FYI. So it's pretty close to, the caloric density of fat, contrary to the popular belief that alcohol is all sugar. You hear that all the time. Oh, it's the sugar in alcohol, because sugar is apparently in everything bad. It must be sugar. That's where we've been the last 20 years, but, I digress.
Yeah.
So,
right. And the thing is, if it was all sugar, it would be 4 calories per gram or ml.
7.
But it's not a 7.
It's almost double. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's closer to a fat, people. That's why you can, accumulate a lot of calories from alcohol. In small amounts, it could be beneficial to your health. It's known to raise your HDL levels. Used to be that, a glass of red wine, because it had resveratrol in it, can improve your HDL. That's your quote-unquote good cholesterol. The last time I read up on this, they said that it didn't matter the type of alcohol. Now, this was 5 years ago. Maybe they changed their mind again. Remember, the problem with peer-reviewed research is that, they're not controlling for all the lifestyle factors that affect these things. Lots of different things affect cholesterol levels. Inactivity affects cholesterol levels. There's no way to monitor that reliably.
Right.
Diet. We know they're not measuring that anymore. There was a time where they did measure diet when institutional review board rules were a lot more lax in the 60s. They would do prison studies and, they take people that were institutionalized and study them. You can't really do that so easily anymore. There's acceptable ways to do it. It's just extremely expensive and, unpopular. So a lot of our nutrition studies and nutrition recommendations are based upon, what people say they eat, not what they actually eat. So you got to be careful with this stuff. But I do believe a drink is probably fine. Maybe it's good for you. There's certainly data on that. So
it reminds me of, you've heard the joke, right? It's like the officer's like, how much have you had to drink tonight? And guy looks him in the face and says, 2 beers, while he's holding up a full hand of 5. So he says 5.
Yep.
2 beers, officer. Right. Yeah. So that's been my experience in practice, hanging around other people and watching their behavior, and then also like working with clients. When people go out and drink and party, they say that they had one thing. Oh, I had a mixed drink and I had a beer. Oh, and I had some chips and queso. And it's like, but what actually happened is they had 3 mixed drinks and they had 2 beers, because they're not counting the one they drank at home, and then the one that they got when they first got to the bar. And then they got the chips and queso. That was right. But then also somebody ordered, the like apple fritters or whatever, and they had a couple of those too.
Of course.
But they didn't eat it. They ate them, but they didn't order them, so they forgot about it, right? And this is the way that things typically go in my experience when we're talking about alcohol.
Yeah. And then they turn around and say, must be the sugar, because
it was all the sugar. Those damn apple fritters.
Apple fritters are just all sugar.
Right.
There's no fat in them, just sugar.
Yeah, right.
And the alcohol is sugar. So, but they drink vodka that night, so it must have just been the apple fritter.
Right. Yeah, I drank vodka. It's clear. There's nothing in here.
Yeah, there's no sugar. Or rum's sweet, so they assume that it's because of the sugar, but it has nothing to do with the sugar. It has to do with the way that it's distilled and whatnot. There's actually there's no added sugar in rum. It's just a sweeter alcohol.
Yeah.
So kind of describe what it is and how it can really add quite a bit of calories. A lot of people think, I'm drinking liquor, so therefore that's better than beer, because beer is going to get me fat. Well, actually, a shot of liquor, which is 1.5 ounces, which is 45 milliliters, is equivalent to a 12-ounce or 360 milliliter beer can, assuming it's 4 to 6% alcohol. We're not talking about IPAs or high gravity, just your standard beer. Or a glass of wine is 5 ounces. So it really depends, how much volume you want in your one drink, and what you prefer, right? But there's no difference between a shot and a can of beer calorically or a glass of wine, right? Other than, beer's carbonated, so you feel a little bit fuller. So, maybe people feel fuller and then conclude that therefore, they're getting fatter because it's beer and not because it's 15 beers,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, so let's put that in context a little bit then. Okay, so let's say like 1 ounce of vodka, right? Mm-hmm. Now, what about so now before I do this, is it 1 ounce or 1.5 ounces?
1.5 ounces.
1.5 ounces, right? Is in a shot. Okay,
Dude.
But before we talk about the calories with vodka, let's talk about what about the proof? Does that matter?
So yeah, that's the next thing, right? So 1.5 ounce or 45 ml shot of liquor assumes it's 80 proof.
80 proof, right? Yeah, so 40%.
So like I said, with beer, 15 beers is a different caloric situation than one beer. 120 proof is a very different caloric situation than 80 proof. Obviously, as the number of drinks goes up, the number of calories you consume go up. As the percentage alcohol by volume goes up, the number of calories you consume goes up, because if there's a greater ratio of alcohol in that liquid, then you're going to have more calories. That means more mils of alcohol, which means more calories. 7 calories per mil, right?
Makes sense.
If you take let's do an example. If you take a 45 mil shot of 80 proof, that's 40% of that 45 is alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Without even doing any math, let's say that you're getting barrel proof, which is 120 proof, which is 60% alcohol, right? Mm-hmm. So now you have 60% of alcohol in the 45 mils. So clearly 60% of 45 mils is greater than 40% of 45 mils, which means you're getting more calories, right?
Yep, makes sense to me.
Yeah, so it's like probably 1.5 times more calories, right? So if there's 130 calories in an 80 mil shot, which I know off the top of my head, then you're getting probably 195 calories, in 120. So it's a difference between 130 calories in your 80 proof and 190 calories in your 120 proof, right? And then anything in between is going to be somewhere in between calorically. But, whiskey drinkers, get a lot of them that listen to our show are probably drinking between 80 and 120. Sometimes you'll find a good whiskey for 130. Tends to be, I don't want to say rare. Most of the higher proof ones just tend to be in the 120s. Sometimes I'll see stuff over 130, and I think of Stag Senior from back in the day. But now you're talking about rare, expensive whiskey that you don't just buy off the shelf. So, if you want to just use round numbers, you're looking at 130 to 200 calories. If you're, drinking whiskey that ranges from 80 to 130, right?
Right. Yep.
And, you're not just having one. We know you're not just having one. I have one or two. I'm a dietitian. I'm an outlier in terms of my eating habits. I typically have one or two. If it's a special occasion or maybe a weekend, not every weekend, I might have 3, but most people aren't just having one, especially most people that hire us. Remember, we're doing all the hard work that the average person doesn't want to do, and that's in the weight room and also with our food, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, let's be realistic here. That this weekend, a lot of you listening had 5, maybe
right.
more,
Yeah,
maybe 10.
Labor Day weekend, had an extra drinking day. Well, and the thing is too, like, yes, there are some of us that drink just whiskey, just bourbon, just scotch, and that's great by itself. But if you're drinking, I would say most people drinking vodka, not everybody, or tequila, or maybe even whiskey, are also having it in a mixed drink of some kind, and that's going to add more calories to the situation. So, like any good Southern boy, I like a good old fashioned. I like a good mint julep. But, now we're talking about taking that shot of whiskey and adding essentially sugar water, right? Adding simple syrup to it and adding sometimes, a Luxardo cherry or something, which also is basically, it's, soaked in sugar, preserved in sugar. And that ups the calories as well. And I would be willing to guess, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to sit there and kind of hash out what I use in an old fashioned. But, now we're talking about a drink that per cocktail is probably 200 calories, 250 calories, just assuming you're using 80 proof whiskey, nothing crazy, not barrel proof or anything. So yeah, that if you have 2 old fashions or 3 old fashions, now that's really adding up. That's easily 600-700 calories.
Right.
And now I think you can understand like how alcohol can become a problem, especially if you are trying to cut. If you're trying to put yourself in a caloric deficit. We've mentioned this before. A lot of times, people will be really good Monday through Thursday, and it's the weekend is where things go off the rails, right? If you overeat by 1,000 calories, then you can undo 4 or 5 prior days of a 200 calorie deficit, right? Or if you overeat by 2,000 calories on the weekend, you can overcome essentially a 400 calorie per day deficit that you did Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
And it compounds, right? So we mentioned before that the thing is, like, we're typically not drinking 1.5 ounces of alcohol in isolation. Sometimes it's mixed with stuff. Often we're drinking more than 1. We're also, like, I don't know about you, but I get a couple drams of whiskey in me, and then I want something sweet. I want a dessert. And, so there we go. It's also driving other dietary habits. You're making other dietary choices you may not have made had you not started drinking, right? So that's going to add to the caloric intake as well. And now all of a sudden, it's not just the amount of calories in the alcohol that you drink, it's also the amount of calories and all the extra food that you ate on top of it. It's the apple fritters.
It's the sugar.
Get you every time.
It's just the sugar, man. It's the damn sugar. The sugar. We got to do an episode on sugar. I started an article on sugar. I need to finish it. But yeah, as he just said, that pretty much sums it up. If you have 5-6 drinks, you're probably having, close to 1,000 calories, right? And that's
just in the drinks.
Yeah, it's assuming no mixers,
Right.
So you could easily get 1,500 calories from alcohol, depending on what you're drinking. And then on top of it, you're going to, have that pizza, have that dessert, go home, kill a bag of Doritos, because drank too damn much. I mean, I've heard all sorts of things over the years.
Yeah.
I've done all sorts of stupid things too when I was a college kid. $5 pizza at Domino's, you just get thrilled about the bargain, then you don't realize you're shoveling away, hundreds and not thousands of calories. So, I get it. But, I get these questions all the time. I get, people like to sign up for coaching or hire a coach, and they don't really understand that, they're going to have to make some sacrifices. And,
right.
If you're going to keep a bunch of snack food in your pantry and, drink 5 pours a night, your likelihood of success, if your goal is to lose body fat, is very low. If your goal is to get stronger, if you're drinking several pours a night for even a couple nights a week, it's going to interfere with your performance. My cousin always jumps to my mind. When he was 20, he was in college running the linear progression. And I always knew when he drank because his form would go to absolute hell the following Monday. And I'd be like, you got wasted, didn't you? And he'd say, yeah, it just is what it is, But it doesn't just, make you feel like shit and you're dragging. You can't move very well. Your coordination goes off. Your technique goes off. That can lead to tweaks and avoidable injuries too.
Right. Or even simply, most of the people that are listening now, most of y'all are novices or maybe early intermediates, or even maybe like somewhere in the middle range of being an intermediate lifter. So you're making progress on a daily, twice a week, once a week, maybe twice every, like bi-weekly, every 2 weeks kind of schedule. Okay, so if you're going to do that, if you want to get stronger and you want to put on the muscle mass, you're going to have to make jumps in weight. Like the bar has to get heavier, right? And so let's say you're on a weekly progression. Okay, so maybe Monday is your intensity day. Okay, well, you got to drive the weight up on intensity day if you want to get stronger and get more results. And if you keep doing things to make that, to artificially hamper yourself on that intensity day, well, that's just one more week that you kind of screwed up. When you get past the novice phase and programming gets more complicated, each constituent workout, it kind of has to all work together as a system within the little cycle that you have, right? So like if you have a weekly cycle, you kind of need all three workouts. Let's assume you're doing a full body split, right? You can't just take one out and be like, well, it's kind of the same. I'll just be able to jump like normal the next week. Maybe you can. Sometimes you can.
People do that.
Sometimes you can. Sometimes you get away with it. Sometimes you can't. Here's the problem. When it goes wrong and you're like, oh man, I ran into a wall. What happened? It's like, well, how many days did you fuck up your intensity day because you got hammered on the weekends and that affected your ability to execute the lifts on Monday? Right? You can extend that to a lot of different habits that we have: sleep, stress, all that kind of stuff. But whatever the reasoning being, like it makes a difference.
Well, you think about it, like lifting is a form of stress, and when you add in other stressors, your body is competing to adapt to these other stressors, and eventually you're not going to be able to adapt to the training. You're not going to be able to complete the training because you're busy recovering from other shit. Every form of stress that you add into your life, you have to recover from. So ideally, in a perfect world, if your goal is to get as strong as humanly possible, you have to reduce those other stressors, or, and this is more commonly what happens because lifting is not everybody's top priority. It's up there for me. I do this for a living. Trent does this for a living. But for most people, it's not priority number one. So you're going to get stronger over a longer time course. It's going to be much slower. But, if you keep showing up, you're just going to get stronger as a side effect of continuing to show up. And I was just talking to a few people about this at the gym. So yeah, if you're going to drink, it's going to fuck you up and it's going to slow things down. If you drink and then you do a bunch of CrossFit or, hike 10 miles, now you're adding two stressors into the mix. And the thing about other activity is most people that like do hiking and, other outdoors activity, it's not as competitive as lifting. They're not quantifying, what they do. They're not trying to incrementally load it, so they don't really, if they, go hungover and do a long hike hungover, they'll be like, oh man, I barely got through that, but I feel better that I did it,
Yeah, sure.
But, if they go to the gym hungover and miss their squat, they get furious, right? So, I've had that happen where, you have somebody that, will sit there and get hammered and then, do a long hike, maybe 2 days in a row. They'll do this whole thing where they're drinking and hiking or drinking and camping and doing other outdoor stuff. Then they'll come in Monday and they'll miss their squat. Why the fuck am I missing? Why am I not making progress? Well, because you added the stressor of a long, challenging hike and lots of alcohol drinking,
Right. And even if it's not physical activity, right? Even if you're not out hiking, like maybe you crushed a bunch of beers while you tubed down the river, a popular pastime in Texas. Okay, well, first of all, just sitting out in the sun all day or going to the football game all day and drinking all day, probably dehydrated too. And then, or you're just staying up late. And even if you're just staying up late, like, oh, well, I was out Saturday night, we went out, went to bed at 3 a.m. Well, I mean, if that's not something you normally do, like that's going to fuck with your recovery over the weekend on top of the alcohol itself, right? It's also the sleep. And so, it's just a whole system. And all this to say is like, it's just, you realize the trade-offs that you're making. It's not our job to decide what is worth doing for you in your life, but it is our job to point out where the trade-offs are.
That's right.
And that's a big thing. Like you've said it many times on this show, right? There's a lot of folks who have goals that are incompatible with their lifestyle.
100%.
And that honestly, that might be everybody that starts coaching, right?
Oh yeah.
that probably is everybody that starts being coached for the first time. It's like you have a goal and your current lifestyle today, before you get coached, when you came to me, is incompatible with your goals. And I'm here to help you, show you what you have to do to get to those goals. And it's up to you to figure out where on the spectrum you want to exist. Yeah, so that's a big part of like what we're pointing out here.
Well, think about it, man. You're a musician too. The same thing goes there. How many people get to quote unquote intermediate or advanced with a guitar,
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, everybody's a novice pretty much.
Yeah.
And then, a handful of people are intermediate and very, very few people develop the chops to play at, a professional level. And then even fewer people get to what I guess the advanced level would be, like where you can play jazz and you can improvise with a trio or something, like there's And the reason being, at some point it just becomes like, in order to get better, you have to dedicate your life to playing music. It's no longer enough to just play by yourself or practice to like some videos or something. You got to go and like go hang out with other musicians and play with them all the time. Put yourselves in musical situations. It's kind of the same thing. Advanced lifters, that's what their life looks like.
Yeah,
they live at the gym.
They're just lifting.
Yeah, they have a baby, and the next day they're hammering it. Christmas Eve, they're in the gym. The day after Christmas, okay, great to see y'all. I got to go train.
Yep.
Thanksgiving, they're training. It's all the time.
Ever see that one video with C.T. Fletcher, Command You to Grow?
Oh man, you've talked about it. I don't think I've seen clips of that video.
It came out 8 years ago. It's funny.
Yeah, I haven't seen the whole thing.
It's super entertaining. But the one part, I think what really drew me to it was, not necessarily that I bought into the idea that, I got to do arms every single day of the year to get 22-inch arms without taking steroids, which is like the claim,
Every day.
Every day. Like, if you want to get 22-inch arms without taking steroids, I'll tell you how I did it, and it ain't no motherfucking secret. For the first year and a half I trained in the gym, every time I stepped in the motherfucking gym, I trained arms. Because I was determined to have big motherfucking arms.
Oh, man.
So I was very entertained by that. And the part where he starts talking about how, I'm trying to remember. It's been a while. Let's see. That's the beginning. I remember the beginning. I have it memorized. But there's a part where he's like, he just talks about how he did it every day, right? So he said basically what you said. You just essentially quoted him without realizing it, Trent. But he's like, every damn day training arms on Christmas, New Year's, my motherfucking birthday,
right?
Anniversaries, every damn day training arms. So that's how I did it, motherfucker.
Right.
I worked my fucking ass off.
And, at least one of those things is true. Which is that he was there every day. I believe that. I don't believe anything else about the steroids, but I do believe that he was there every day.
So, my lifters get a kick out of it because I was just so entertained by that video, man.
Oh, it's
I don't
great,
know why.
man.
Just,
It's like watching, I send my lifters sometimes. I'll send them like Ronnie Coleman videos, like especially if they're doing like some.
Oh, yeah.
I'll sign like some curls or like some rows or whatever. I'd be like, all right, so like before you do these, you got to watch some Ronnie Coleman. And,
yeah.
And that's like, if that doesn't get you hyped up to do like sets of 12 on your rows, I don't know what will. But yeah, and so there it is. So I think that's the crux of what we're talking about today is that alcohol is like everything else. It's a lifestyle decision. Whether or not you're gonna drink it, what you're gonna do, how many you're gonna have, how you're going to incorporate it in your life. And so, you gotta. So you've got to account for this stuff. You can't just sweep it under the rug and be like, oh, yeah, I had some drinks and not. But I don't think that's it. It was the apple fritters. It's the sugar. I just got to cut all the sugar out of my life.
I'm just not doing enough volume.
Do more volume. Cut the sugar out, do more volume, and then that's what I need. No. It's the 1,000 calories a weekend that you drink. But I think there's some other stuff too, right? So it's not just the calories, right? We've already pointed out that there's other stuff that comes along with it, right? There's other behaviors, like you stay out later, you eat other food. But it also, like alcohol, especially if you're going to drink a lot of it, has impacts on your endocrine system, right? And it has impacts on your sleep, which also has an impact on your hormones.
Yeah, I mean, alcohol disrupts your metabolism. For your biochemistry geeks, it disrupts the Krebs cycle. It could deplete B vitamins, which are necessary to facilitate normal human metabolism. They're also cofactors, so they're involved in various chemical reactions in human metabolism. So that's why I recommend before you go to bed after a long night of drinking to take a multivitamin, plenty of water too, and sodium and potassium to rehydrate. Probably Gatorade would be good. But, I read a long time ago, it's been a while since I've read the endocrine responses to alcohol, but I read a long time ago that it can lower T, and it makes sense. Testosterone, for those of you new to the lifting world, T is,
capital T.
What is that? Capital T is is a slang for testosterone. But it can lower testosterone. It can apparently raise estrogen, so it can throw the ratios off there.
Yeah,
Which,
I have heard that. I've heard that beer, in particular, some people claim that is estrogenic. Now, is that alcohol, or is it the beer in particular? Like I think
it's probably the alcohol.
Okay. Yeah.
It goes back to so many variables not controlled.
Sure. Yeah.
But it also damages your liver. You have damage on your kidneys. Your liver regulates your blood glucose levels. Remember, you deposit glycogen in the liver. Liver takes in glucose, stores it, releases it back into the bloodstream. Yeah. Muscles can't do that. Our muscles are selfish. They only feed themselves. So once the sugar goes into your muscle, it stays in there until you contract the muscle. Then it starts feeding itself with sugar. The liver can release it into your bloodstream. You store a little bit in the kidneys and in the fat cells too, but I'd say 80% of your glycogen is stored in your muscle, and roughly 20% is stored in your liver. So they say about 400 grams in the muscle, 100 grams in the liver, and then trace amounts in the kidney and fat cells.
Yeah.
So, somebody asked recently about diabetes and alcoholics and this and that. And, it damages your liver. So your liver's not functioning correctly. You're not going to have good glucose homeostasis if the key regulator is damaged. You should think about that from a simplistic standpoint, without going into a bunch of physiology and biochemistry. Your liver is responsible for regulating your blood sugar, and you are damaging that organ by drinking lots and lots of alcohol. That can also damage the pancreas as well. The pancreas is the organ that releases insulin to lower blood sugar. So when you take that into account, you could potentially, make yourself more glucose intolerant through various mechanisms. So in terms of the endocrine system, it can affect your sex hormones, but it can also affect glucose release and insulin release as well. If it's heavy enough use,
Sure. And I imagine too, I mean, this is also like you've got the confounding variable of, if you're also getting fatter with drinking a lot, right? And you have more adipose tissue, that also in itself is estrogenic, right? Just having a lot of excess fat tissue.
Yeah. If you get more fat tissue, you could become more insulin resistant.
And insulin resistant, yeah, right.
And, to be a little more specific, because it just came back to me because we were just having this conversation at the gym, long-term chronic alcohol abuse could lead to pancreatitis. And remember, the pancreas has those little beta cells. Those beta cells release insulin. This is kind of what I said earlier. So, if you're doing something that's going to increase your risk of pancreatitis, you can also potentially develop some diabetes since you're not effectively releasing the hormone responsible for lowering blood sugar levels when they're getting elevated. So it's a lot of bad things that can happen. Then, of course, it damages brain cells. That's obvious, to a lot of people. It has direct effects on the brain. And, you take all that into account. I mean, why would it benefit your training to get drunk all the time,
Yeah. And I think that's, hopefully that's pretty obvious to people who tune into the show. But, more sort of acutely, though, so to kind of sum up what you said earlier, my sort of layman's understanding is that when you drink alcohol, essentially your body, it disrupts metabolism because essentially your body has to work on processing that or digesting that first, and then it can kind of get back to what it was doing before you started drinking, right? Would that be a fair way to say it?
Yeah, you have to recover from that, and that takes a few days.
Okay, yeah. So if you're drinking half an ounce of whiskey, not really a big deal, right? But if you have 4 ounces of whiskey, that's a much bigger project for your body to have to, kind of process that, clear it from your bloodstream, and then get back to, the other metabolic processes that it was doing beforehand.
Yeah. So you got to give it time, and the heavier the bout of drinking, the worse it's going to be.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Then, when it comes, then there's sleep, right? You recover through sleep. Alcohol can disrupt your sleep if you're drinking a lot of it. I mean, I remember, I always sleep pretty well, but if I have a half pour, I'll knock right out and sleep just fine. I'm not recommending people do that. This is an N of one anecdote. This is an N of one anecdote. I'm not recommending that people drink before bed. Typically, it has the opposite effect. Everything I've read and everybody I've talked to, they might fall asleep. They can't stay asleep. That's what I've heard about alcohol. It disrupts your sleep. You sleep like shit. You end up sleeping less, and the quality of your sleep goes down. You don't get into REM sleep, so you don't get a deep sleep. You're not rested. And it obviously affects your behavior, too, your motivation, Even if you do drag yourself under the bar, you may not push as hard. You feel like shit,
Sure, yeah.
It makes you more irritable. So just a lot of things that happen when you drink heavily. Now, does that mean you can't drink? No, I said, a drink. So what do we define as a drink? I said 45 mils of liquor at 80 proof and a 12-ounce can of beer, 5-ounce glass of wine. That beer's 4 to 6%. That wine, wine percentages don't typically vary too much. It's in the low teens.
Yeah.
10, somewhere in the, I don't know,
10 to 15%.
12 to 10 to 15%, depending on the wine. So usually it's the beer and the liquor where people try to game the system and say, I drink liquor, like you drink 120. That's like a drink and a half. You're drinking IPAs that are 10%.
The barley wine beers, whatever that.
Yeah, so you got to think of that, right? 1 to 2 is probably fine for most people. You start drinking 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you spread them out, it's less than if you have them in a short amount of time, but it's less negative. But it's still, you're still going to feel that drag the next day. You're going to feel like off,
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, right, is that a lot of the people listening to this show and a lot of the people that we work with are looking for, like, performance is important, obviously, right? For the reasons that if you want to get the results out of training, the training has to progress. And if you're doing things if you're throwing wrenches in the machine to stop your progression, then you're also not going to get the results you want. But I think for a lot of folks too, they want to trim up, right? They want to lose some body fat and they want to recomp over time. And that the gym is a driver, right, for sure. But at the same time, like we've said many times, like the kitchen is probably where most of the work is going to happen. And so if you are in that position and you do have more body fat than you want, and you want to recomp, you want to get leaner, whether or not you need to be in a cut or not, that's a separate conversation. But let's say that you are, or you at least don't need to be in a surplus. Well, it's the behaviors that come with drinking in excess that are going to, that's probably going to throw the bigger wrench, right? Is having 3 drinks over a weekend going to wreck you? By themselves, probably not. But like I said earlier, it's not just the 3 drinks. It's the fritters and the burgers and the pizza and the extra French fries, and you reached over and you're like, oh, this guy had onion rings at the bar. It's like, I'm gonna have a couple of those. So he didn't finish his. It's that stuff, right? That really adds up, and like we said before, that's where the results are lost. It's usually in these, like, it's the bingers, right, over the weekend, where you can undo so much of the progress that you had created already throughout the week.
Yeah, from a body fat standpoint, all that stuff, you'll put it on, drinking and eating a bunch. From a training standpoint, if you're drinking several pours over a short period of time, that's going to do the most damage.
Yeah,
if you're drinking several pours spread out, I drink slow. My friends get pissed because they get wasted and I'm still on my first or second drink. I get shit for this all the time, but, I try to drink slow, I eat slow, But anyways, I cut down. I lost 25, 30 pounds recently, and I drank on Fridays at the gym. Some nights I might have had 3,
Sure. Yeah.
There are probably nights where I had 4, but this is over several hours. So, yeah, I definitely felt it the next day. I was dragging, not dragging bad like I was hungover from a, day of tailgating and a night at the college bar, but, I felt a little bit of a drag the next day, but I still PR'd my squat and deadlift. I still lost all the weight I need to lose. I adjusted my diet accordingly. So, I'll say this. I'll say that spreading it out is better than drinking it all at once, but both will have a negative effect.
Yeah.
And that's obvious. If you're drinking, 5 pours in an hour, you're going to get pretty hammered. If you drink 5 pours in 5 hours, you're going to feel something the next day. You're going to feel the negative side effects of it the next day, but not nearly to the same extent as drinking 5 in an hour,
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it makes sense, right? Because again, there's also the behavioral aspect of that, right? Like if I'm, when I drink whiskey, my preference, like I said earlier, is to drink really nice stuff. I don't drink a whole lot of it, so I don't mind spending money on a good bottle because it's going to last me for a long time. But it's also because I'm going to enjoy it. I'm there to sip on some whiskey and have a conversation with some friends. I'm there to listen to some. I'm going to put on some, Oscar Peterson in the background. Listen to some jazz and sip on that thing and enjoy it. I'm not pounding burgers at the sports bar, right? It's just a totally different environment. So the behavior around drinking is different when you spread things out versus drinking a whole bunch at once.
100%.
Yeah. All right, so let's get down to brass tacks a little bit about like kind of some Can we draw some recommendations for people, with like managing their drinking? I'm gonna throw one out there. Let's see what you think. You coach a lot more folks with nutrition than I do. I think that the average person that wants to have a good body composition and wants to change their body composition for the better, they want to get leaner, they want to be more muscular, they want to train well. I think that they should drink a maximum of once per week, and that they should limit themselves to 2 drinks during that whatever day that they decide that they want to have those drinks. I don't think that they should have 1 drink on 2 days, because it's very easy for a lot of people for that 1 drink to become 2. Once they pour the first drink, the second drink just whoop. Where did that come from? I've seen that many times. Some people don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with that, but I know a lot of people who do. So I think it should be 1 day, 2 drinks. That's it. And do that for a while is my suggestion, and build the habit of controlling yourself and having the 1 drink and being satisfied with that. And that means maybe you're going to have to switch alcohol. Maybe you like try a cocktail and sip on it for a while. Try some whiskey if you don't drink whiskey, or whatever sounds good. Instead of doing a Jaeger shot, something that you can actually sit with for a little while. That would be my suggestion, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think first, people that are having the issues you're talking about are hearing all this, and they're like, well, fuck, that's, I drank 3 times that, man. There's a fraction of our listeners that probably have had that thought cross their mind.
Yep.
Well, you're not going to go from 6 to 1, That's not how I recommend people approach things. You're going to do it incrementally. So, if you're drinking 6 pours over a 3-hour period, maybe try to go 5 pours over a 4-hour period, just try to LP that shit.
Sure.
If you have serious alcoholism, and you know who you are, I'm not a doctor. I don't run AA meetings. I don't diagnose alcoholism, but if you have serious alcoholism, then you need to go seek help, whether it's, through your own reading and learning, or through friends, family. There's lots of ways to approach that. That's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. That's, they're talking about addiction at that point. That's not what we're talking about, because some people, it's all or nothing. They just can't drink,
Sure. Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, and you know who you are, and that I'm not talking to you when I say, hey, go from 6 to 5, because I'm not going to insult your intelligence like that. It's a very challenging thing to do when there's an addiction present. So I just want to put that out there for those who are suffering from that. I understand that. I had a very good dear friend who was an alcoholic years ago. And, I'm very familiar with some of the symptoms and behaviors of that. And that's not who we're talking to here. But, if you're the kind of person that, goes out and drinks, just like people go out to eat, it's another type of, indulgence, I should say.
Yeah, sure.
Then, start thinking about your alcohol consumption, just think, okay, well, wait a minute, I have 5 glasses of wine, wine's another popular one. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, maybe try to have 3 or 4, and then try to work towards 2, and if you're going to do that, then, cut back on the carbs and the fats earlier in the day, but, try to keep your protein up, because alcohol is catabolic. So, if I know I'm going to a restaurant on a Saturday night, and I might have a steak and some whiskey. I'll have my breakfast, I'll have my omelet as always, but I'll probably cut out the oatmeal. Maybe I'll just have a banana. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
And then I'll have, another protein source, throughout the day. Maybe I'll have a burrito bowl that I make myself with extra lean meat. vegetables, no carbs. Then I'll go out, I'll have my steak, I'll have my vegetables, my fat's pretty much going to cover my energy nutrients, as I like to call them, in the cooking. And then I'll have a couple drinks, Or, if I'm not going to eat, then I'll probably eat more throughout the day, and then I'll save calories for a couple of drinks. I'm like, okay, well, I need, 200 to 300 calories, so I'm going to have 2 to 3 drinks,
Yeah.
And that's how I think about it. Now, I like liquor. I like whiskey. I'm not going to go order a cocktail. If I'm going to order a cocktail, I'll make different adjustments, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And sometimes I'm in the mood for an old fashioned, just not very often, but treat that like a dessert. Sometimes I want ice cream. Sometimes I want an old fashioned. Sometimes I want wine, but typically I just want, whiskey or wine is what I typically bounce back and forth between. And with certain people, like my neighbors are beer guys, so I'll have beers with them,
Sure.
Yeah. They're out in the driveway, I know I'm having beer. So I'm like, okay, well, haven't drank yet. It's usually at the end of the day on a Saturday, I'll get home and they'll be out and I'll be, all right, I'll join you, so I know I'm going to have probably a couple beers. So that means no whiskey that night,
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like anything else. You're looking at your slots. You have your carbs, fats, proteins, and you have your alcohol. And I'll typically pull from the carbs and the fat and try to keep the protein up, and then take a multivitamin before bed, and call it a day. Make sure I'm drinking a couple big glasses of water. Throw a salt tablet in there.
Now let me just make this clear. Because I know some people just heard that last sentence you said and were like, oh, well, I'll just stop eating carbs. I just won't eat any carbs over the weekend and I'll be fine. I'll basically just make up for my alcohol consumption right there. Oh, perfect. I got it.
Okay,
so when intensity day rolls around on Monday, when you've got to hit a 5 RM squat, how do you think that's going to go with 0 carbs on board? Probably not very well, right? So no, it's we're not talking about like cutting out. You can't just cut out all of your food to make room for alcohol.
No, that's absolutely what we're not. We're not telling you to do
that. I've had people try to do that before, and I've seen that in the gym. It's like, what's going on? They're like, well, it's they were concerned about their caloric surplus and then not thinking about actually fueling themselves for the workout.
Yeah, I see. When I drink like that, and mind you, 3 is a lot for me. It's a Friday night. I've had my last heavy workout of the week, and I get 2 days off.
Yeah, sure.
So
sure.
I think that's why I get away with it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and I think the big thing here too is like it's the fact that you've planned it. I think the person that we're really talking to right here is if you have just drank alcohol as a part of your social gatherings and going out to dinner or going out to eat in general, and you just really haven't considered it. It's like, oh, we're going out to eat. Oh, this is going to be great. Yeah, I'll have a beer. Everybody's having a drink. Okay, I'll have one too. Okay, well, did you think about that? Did you probably knew, like, what your habits are, right? Like, you know that, like, it's Friday night. We usually go out. Okay, so you're going out to dinner already. And, like you just described, and we've talked about in previous episodes, you want to make a plan for that. It's like, okay, we know you're going to overeat by somewhere on the order of 500 to 2,000 calories, right? So probably you're going to overeat by 1,000 calories, versus had you not gone out to eat at all, right? Okay, well, you just plan for that. You have a light lunch, or light breakfast, light lunch, and you'll be okay. You can kind of minimize the damage, right? So to speak. Well, the same thing, you could just do the same thing with your alcohol consumption. If you haven't, what I find is that most folks that have a problem with this, and they're not getting the results they want out of their dietary changes and their training, is because they haven't really considered the alcohol at all. It's just sort of been added on, and it's like it becomes just a social thing. It's like, oh, everyone else is having drinks, I'll have some drinks too. Mm-hmm. But they didn't plan around that. So, that's all we're saying is just with a little bit of planning, you can figure out what your slots are. I like that way of thinking about it.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. So now that we've been a giant buzzkill, I got to finish my whiskey here. So we need to sign off.
All right, man. Thank you for tuning into the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me at weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at @Robert_Santana or weights _and_plates.
Very good. You know where to find me, jonesbarbellclub.com, or you can find me on Instagram at marmalade_cream. Yeah, so we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.